everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of Surrounded by Bourbon with me, Phil Crawford, aka Causeway Whisky. This is episode 31, and today I am looking at something that I had not seen for a long time, except on TV shows, and it is J&B Rare blended Scotch Whisky. So J&B being Justerini and Brooks. Whisky is really full of tropes and misinformation. One such piece of misinformation that you will commonly find being told is that the first commercially available single malt whisky was Glenfiddich, released in 1963. But if you dig a little deeper though, you will find out that actually single malt whiskies in the 19th century were very much on vogue. They were very much trending. For example, Royal Bragla was heavily advertised in English newspapers. Islay whisky such as Port Ellen and Ardbeg was readily available in the US in the 1890s, and there was even a chain of bars in Scotland and London known as La Clachan, owned by an Edinburgh man named John Stewart. And there you could find and sample Scotch whisky from the likes of Talisker and Glen Grant, and ranging from any ages from like 5 to 16 years. Now, single malt was rather niche, as it is today, when you think about the volume of whisky that is actually sold around the world. Two things happened in the 19th century that would help kind of push whisky as an entire sector more mainstream. In 1831, the first thing that happened was NS Coffee patented, that's easy for me to say, the continuous still that allowed for the cheap production of grain whisky and in massive volumes. And then in 1860 there was William Gladstone's Spirits Act, which allowed for malt and grain whiskies from the coffee stills to be vatted together under bond for the first time. This meant that whisky could now be made cheaply and be made available for mass consumption. At this point enter the grocers, or the Italian warehousemen as some of them like to call themselves. Famous names that you will know through whisky brands such as Chivas Brothers in Aberdeen. There was John Walker in Kilmarnock. There was John Dewar in Perth and William Teacher of Glasgow, just to name a few. And they created some of the most famous brands in the world from this legislation. Now, today, blended whisky can often be kind of looked down upon in whisky circles, even though it's probably one of the first steps for any whisky enthusiast as they start their journey, is probably trying blended whisky. I know personally that, I was drinking Bushmills, which was a blend, and when I first dipped my toes into the world of Scotch, I was drinking things like Bellas and Teachers. Please don't shoot me, but that was my first foray into the world of Scotch. Modern iterations of these brands, however, maybe don't quite match up to the quality that they were in the past, and so blends definitely are looked down upon compared to their single malt compatriots. Anyway, a bit about Justerini and Brooks. They first came into being in 1749 when an Italian named Giacomo Justerini and an Englishman, George Johnson, started a wine and spirits business in London. In 1760, Johnson actually assumed full control of the company, but his family sold the business in 1831 to Alfred Brooks, who kept the name Justerini but added his name, and it became Justerini and Brooks. And by 1884, he had developed the J&B Club Scotch Whisky. But after a trip to Prohibition-era America, the director of J&B actually specifically created the J&B Rare for the US market, and it finally turns up in the US in 1936. And so this is a brand that has been heavily marketed in Italian TV and film through the 1960s. It was featured in movies like The Thing, it's been in TV shows like The Sopranos, but from my point of view it actually kind of pretty much disappeared from UK shelves of any off licenses or liquor stores that I went to in the UK kind of by the 2000s. So seeing it here in the US on the shelves, I was kind of intrigued. I wanted to buy a bottle, and I wanted to see whether, you know, something at this price point is really worth getting. The brand itself is now in the hands of Diageo, and this is a blend of 42 malts and grain whiskies. And apparently it has a few mandatory malts, which are Manachmore, Croist, Glen Spey and Strathmill, and at least some of the grain whisky will have come from Diageo's Cameron Bridge industrial alcohol producing plant. Pretty big place. So anyway, let's get on to the J&B Rare. This is bottled at 40%. I'm 100% convinced it's chill filtered. It's probably not natural colour. This cost me $19.99 here in my local Total Wine, so that's around £15 or €17.50. So, you know, not expensive. But is it going to be something that gives me a bit of joy? Let us dig in and find out. So it definitely comes across as grain heavy. There's a lot of ethanol and kind of floral perfume notes here. There's vanilla, some pear drop sweets, a little custard. There's a hint of saltiness and just the faintest lick of peat. And that's kind of it. It's kind of hard to get past the ethanol though, to be honest. Just looking at the glass, it, you know, it runs fairly thin, so not expecting a great mouthfeel here, but let's try on the palate. Yep, pretty thin. It's pretty, there's a little prickly heat on arrival. And then you get kind of like tart citrus, so think of like grapefruit and pink grapefruit. There's a little kiwi fruit, so kind of like green fruit, and maybe verging into like melon. A little bit of pepper. But then it kind of follows through with like astringent oak and slightly solventy. So yeah, my mouth is super dry right now. Go for another sip and see if we can get any more, but when I was doing my notes, this definitely did not have a lot of flavour development going on, and it's kind of following suit. It's a very simple whiskey. Okay, finish. We'll take another sip and we'll go on to the finish. There's nothing else really coming to mind that's jumping out at me here. So. Finish is very short. There's a bit of pepper, there's that pink grapefruit, and then there's oak. And that's kind of your lot. So I mean, J&B Rare, I'm pretty sure this is not rare, as it is absolutely massively mass produced. What would I give this score wise? I'm kind of hovering between like a 2 and a 3. And I think my grumpy side's going to win tonight, and I'm going to go for a 2. Yeah, 2 out of 10. This is definitely not something I am going to buy again. It is definitely not something I am going to recommend to anybody. This is indeed a whiskey bore. It's a little too spirity for me, a bit rough around the edges. There is pretty much no flavour development whatsoever. Is it cheap? Yes. Is it cheerful? Not really. Interestingly though, you know, because sometimes I do go and have a little rummage around the internet and just see how other people feel about these whiskies. This got a 7 out of 10 on the Whiskey Wash, which I really find hard to believe. So make of that what you will, but for me, this is not good whiskey. So, and especially here in America, where, you know, $20, there's definitely bourbons that will walk all over this. So yeah, not something that I can recommend. Anyway, that's enough of me for tonight. Please like, comment, share. Please do make comments on the videos if you find them informative and entertaining. Also, let me know if you also drink J&B or you have had it before, what your thoughts are. And for the next video, we are heading back to the stateside. Going to look at a bourbon. So thank you very much for joining me on this video, and I will see you again. Have a great night. Sláinte.